Choosing a subject for artists can be one of the most challenging parts of the whole process. What to paint, what you're passionate about. Some tips that I have found to be helpful in choosing a subject are, first of all, to choose something you're passionate about, that you just love, that you can't wait to get to art class each week to work on, or you can't wait to get back to your easel. The reason I feel like that, when you get to the middle part of any project, which is usually the hardest part, and I always liken it to the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. God told them to go to the middle part and pick up the 12 stones and go set those up somewhere so that every time they passed by later on, they would be reminded of the middle, the hard part where they couldn't see where they came from, and it was hard to see where they were going, and they were tempted to just give up and turn back. And so I feel like that's a pretty profound statement to say for just a painting. But we do get to a spot where we think, you get it drawn and you go, oh, it's looking pretty good. I think I might be able to pull this off. Then you get a bunch of color on the canvas and you say things in your head like, who was I kidding? What was I thinking that I'm an artist? And you start to doubt yourself, and you really are tempted to want to throw in the towel and quit. And it just breaks my heart to think of the many people who have done that because they didn't have an encourager. They didn't have somebody there to spur them on to the other side. So choose that little sweet baby face or something that you love, the ocean or a flower or something that's really exciting to you. Number 2 is to choose good lighting and a good one-direction light source. As a portrait painter, I get the worst photographs from clients that you can imagine. Usually they're flash photos, which is the most unnatural lighting. It's one huge beam of light that is flashed onto a person's face and washes out every bit of color and every bit of shadows that would help create dimension and form. Put your subject next to a window. At my granddaughter's birthday party last week, I positioned her on the table out there in the studio right next to the sliding glass doors, and I turned her little butt towards me to where there was light coming in on one side of her face. And I know ahead of time to position things in a place where you have good natural light. If you're outside, get under a tree or a canopy or an umbrella. My grape arbor is one of the best places because you get nice side light. Or wait until evening when the sun is at its golden hour, about 6 o'clock. Or early morning when it's coming in from the side. It'll be a cooler light usually in the morning. So that's half the battle of choosing your subject, is making sure there's good lighting, and in your photographs there's going to be distortions, so you need all the help you can get. Number 3, always keep a folder of possible subjects. Subjects that, again, cause butterflies in your stomach when you think about painting them. It is very easy to fizzle in your artistic journey when you're between projects. So I keep a folder every year. Since about 2011, I have folders, and each of them has anywhere from 50 to 200 possible paintings in it. Make a habit of looking for beautiful things to paint and recording them with your phone or your camera. And then store and collect your ideas. If you're on Pinterest, make sure you have boards of possible inspirational things to paint. Or for me, I keep beautiful references to refer to when I'm doing a portrait or a painting, how people handled certain situations. Number 4 is to study the old masters. The practice of copying old masters has been around as long as there have been old masters. It's a huge part of the classical way of training to become an artist. A great example of that is Cesar Santos, the Cuban painter that has a daily blog. And he has these wonderful sketchbooks where he has found a high-resolution image from an old master and done the painting at home in his studio. And then he takes the sketchbook into the museum and compares the brush strokes and the color and the value and the drawing with the original painting. It's one of the best ways to learn new techniques is to copy another artist. Of course, you don't want to sell or show copies of paintings. They don't belong to you. And that goes back to developing your own photography skills and your own composition skills so that you know what constitutes a good composition and you're setting up your subject matter in a good way. And we can learn that from the old masters. Number 5, some tips for when you take a portrait commission and you're picking out the reference or the subject material. Always look at the largest variety of photos that you can from your client and be sure that they like the pose you select 100%. A big red flag is when somebody says, can you change blank? Can you make them smile more? Can you bend their head down? Can you make their squinty eyes open more? It's very, very difficult to make things up. So try to be sure that your client loves the pose that you both choose together. Make sure that it captures their personality and their essence. We're not just copyists trying to create an exact replica of what's in front of us. Kinsler talked about his portrait of John Wayne, and he said if you measured it and checked the fine detail, you would find that there were many errors. But because he spent time with John Wayne and he found out different things like why he stood with his hands on his hips so often, that was from his football days. He got to know John Wayne, and he was able to capture him on the canvas, not in a scientific way, but as John Wayne's son later told him, it's my dad exactly. You captured him on the canvas. So that is our goal, is to try to get as close a likeness and character of the person as we can. And try to paint from life if you can. It's so important. There's no way to get to know your subject better than if you can paint from life, even just a little bit, or go and take the photo references yourself. And number 6 is to have a folder of references. Look at how other artists have handled similar subject matter, as I mentioned earlier. Look for examples of backgrounds with blonde hair or black hair. Look for, you're painting babies, so look for edges. How do people handle edges? And how did they handle the big baby head? And did they crop? If you find and collect lots of beautiful paintings, then when you're stumped and you're struggling to know how to handle a situation, because no matter how hard you plan and choose your subject, you're always going to run into problems. So if you have these references, you can study how people handle difficult situations. And Instagram, you can make bookmarks. I have folders for painting houses, landscapes, trees, portraits, figures, drawings, just a whole host of topics that I have bookmarks for. And when I need references, it's a lot easier for me to go and find them. I also have probably 50,000 images of beautiful artwork on my desktop computer that I can refer to as well. We'll go back and talk a little bit about the choosing this little girl with the 7 mouths. The grandmother commissioned me to paint these 2 children, and she gave me a collection of photographs, but she wanted a head and shoulders of each child separately to hang on a wall with the rest of her grandchildren. But the biggest problem that I didn't really anticipate was the little girl's mouth, which is very dark. You don't see any teeth at all. So my choice of photographs was based on what the grandmother wanted. There were actually 7 different versions of this little girl's mouth. So that's the one. If I did use that for a portfolio, I would use the one with her teeth not showing. Typically on a portrait, if the teeth are showing, it's a dead giveaway that it's a photograph you're working from, because the person posing cannot hold a big smile like that. I do paint teeth sometimes because I feel like that's very characteristic of a person's essence. If they have a big toothy smile, they would look funny with their mouth closed. This second client is a portrait I did. The mother had passed away, and the portrait was commissioned by her son-in-law, and it was just a few months afterwards. He brought me a selection of photos. Most of them didn't work at all. These two were the ones that were even partially doable. There just weren't a lot of photographs of her that were complimentary. I chose the one on the right. It really doesn't even look like the same woman. They look very different. The one on the right is a little tiny thumbnail off of a website that they found, so that when I enlarged it, it pixelated terribly. So I did a quick sketch of the two just to give them an idea of how it would look on paper. Still, they chose this photo of her. And you can see in these 5 different images of her that I did get a likeness. The first one, her face is a little wide. It emphasizes her chin. He surprised her for some holiday by having it up on the mantle. When she came in the room, she did not like it. She cried. She said it looked like her mom was sucking on a pickle. So we went back and forth over a period of about a year with me making adjustments. And you see that I smoothed her chin. I tried to put a little bit of a smile on the corners of the mouth. I tried to lift her eyes a little bit so that they were brighter and happier. At the very end, I totally lifted her mouth. They sent me an additional picture you see here in the middle. And I tried to do the cheeks more like that, but it was very different. Even though she's pursing her lips, it was a different pose. I took the glasses off. Still, she did not like it. And I had a love-hate relationship with this portrait. I would stick it over in the corner and I just wouldn't look at it for months because I didn't know what else to do. Finally, I made the decision because it was haunting me, and I did a quick sketch of the first picture that my instinct told me to use. I sent her an email, JPEG of it, and she loved it. I stuck it in a box and mailed it off to her. And that was the way I handled this. But it was a great lesson for me to make sure to use my own instincts, because I am the expert in this area. My clients usually don't have a clue about portraits. But to spend the time on the front end choosing your subject matter. Even if you go to a workshop, choose your pose carefully. If you're setting up a still life, spend extra time setting it up. If you're setting your model up, spend some time, because we get harassed and we plunk right down and we don't give the subject enough time and consideration. No amount of paint will fix a bad composition. The last thing is this illustration of wisdom from John Singer Sargent. You see that this face has the eyes blurred out. And his quote says, "If you work on a head for a week without indicating the features, you will have learned something about the modeling of the head." That too often, after we get started on a portrait, we think all about the details, about the eyelashes, the nostrils, the lips, all those details, without even being aware that we're working on a sphere, a round head that has volume and shape and form. And we get so enamored with the flat surface that we totally forget the head. How important that is to remember. Helen Van Wyck's advice and experience with this was that one time her teacher went out and bought a big bag of apples. He poured them out on the table and he told her to spend the day painting those apples. When the painting was complete, he went back over and put the apples back in the bag. He brought out the bag of apples and said, "Now, I want you to pull out each apple from the bag and tell me which is which in your painting." She said it was a tough lesson in the difference between knowing, as we all do, that no two apples are alike, actually painting them so you can tell them apart. So knowing your subject, really spending time looking at it is essential. And also she says that one of the biggest problems with painting is that we're too timid. She says you can't be timid. Don't be in awe of painting. Don't be afraid of the process. Grab it with gusto and beat the crap out of it. Really get into your painting and spend the time you need, even time looking through pictures, looking at other artwork, looking at art books. Those are part of the process. They're part of choosing a good subject. The last thing I'll mention is choosing a size and surface to paint on. We typically use canvas that is stretched and primed because the cotton canvas alone would be just a plant material that could interact with paint and begin to break down. So you want to have a good prime on your canvas, and many of the canvases that you buy today are just primed with acrylic gesso, which is calcium carbonate. It's very absorbent. It sucks every bit of the oil out of your paint, and it doesn't allow for a good working surface to move that paint around and blend well. So I like to prime my canvases with Bullseye 123 Primer by Zinsser, Zinsser. You can buy it at Home Depot or Walmart's. I can tint that primer with a little bit of acrylic color so that I'm not working on a white surface. I like a 11 by 14 or a 12 by 16 for most portraits of head and shoulders. And a head that is larger than life will be a little disturbing sometimes. Not always, it's not a rule, but for the most part. I also use Masonite or ampersand, especially when I'm doing the grisaille and glazing method. So it's a little slick to work on, but if you go ahead and tone it and prime it and give it a little bit of a tooth, sometimes I put marble dust in it. That gives a nice surface. If you're just practicing and learning, I prefer the canvas tablet, which has sheets of canvas that are primed and prepared for you to paint on. And these are great because if you do, as Helen says, 50-50 chance of a mess or a masterpiece. If you do turn out with a beautiful painting from your practice, you can always mount that canvas on a piece of foam core or gator board or even masonite. You can glue it down and frame it. Whereas if you buy those little cardboard canvases for practice, you see those sometimes at yard sales and they have gotten damp or wet and they've warped. And believe me, I have tried to remove the canvas from that cardboard and it doesn't happen. It's just stuck to it and it's not a good solid surface to work on. It's actually cheaper to buy the canvas pads, and you can buy nice quality canvas pads. Senso has a good canvas pad. Centurion has a great canvas pad. And then you can just buy the little cheap ones and put a good primer on there, some Zinsser. So that is my presentation about choosing your subject. There are many, many more considerations in choosing your subject matter. Spend the time it takes and choose wisely. Don't just throw something up there just because you can't think of what to do. You won't have the passion to finish it, and you'll fizzle with it. And you'll be able to tell on the canvas if it's something you love. It'll show in your work. And if you're bored with it, or if you're timid and scared, that's going to show too. So remember, it's just a piece of canvas or a piece of board and some paint. You can paint over it. You can start over. You can gesso over it. There is no reason to let it intimidate you.